Well, we won't choose that until audit.
That's right. That's a fair one. All right, let's get started this evening. I'd like to call the February meeting to order with a salute to the flag, please. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody this evening. We're going to start out, not with the agenda, we're going to jump off the agenda to start. I've asked our town engineer, representative from Moore Associates, George Smith, to come in tonight to discuss the noise control ordinance that we've been talking about. He's drafted a policy that we looked at, that I gave everybody a copy of. Take a look at some ideas. He's going to try to go through, walk through a little bit, explain a little bit about it, answer some questions, and see if we can't clear up anything that we had questions on with him. So I'd like to welcome George. I appreciate you coming in tonight. And if you don't mind, maybe we could just briefly go through this and talk about it a little bit.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, just a draft version of a sound control ordinance. Starts off with pretty standard stuff and definitions. Some of the definitions I think that I would like to talk about that a lot of laws don't have in them, you find on page 4, LEQ, L10, L90, Lmax, and Lmin on the top of the page.
Third page.
So when we talk about sound levels,
Third page in. Oh, you don't have that one?
I'll look out later.
All right. So a lot of ordinances speak about different sounds, and they give numbers, thresholds, 60, 65, 80, whatever the number happens to be, and they never actually say, well, what is that number? So typically, what the number is an LEQ, which is what it's interpreted to be, which is a weighted average over time. That number is a good number. I mean, it's helpful, but it doesn't describe the entire sound that you're looking at and you're hearing. So the other values that I've shown you here, these statistical numbers, the L10, for instance, that's the sound that's exceeded 10% time. So that's the upper end, the louder sounds that any sound generator may be making. The L90 would be your lower end, 90% of the time, right? And then, of course, Lmax and Lmin are pretty self-explanatory. Those are usually missing on most towns' ordinances, and they're very important because those values will characterize the entire sound. So you know, on average, I have a certain amount of sound that I'm hearing, but we have a max and a min, and then 90%, 10%, so you get a good idea. It's not just 60. Well, 60 what? Instantaneously, I clap my hands. Right now, I'm at 66.5, standing here. Obviously, that would drop with distance. But that's, you know, again, clap your hands, it's going to go up to 70, 75. Boom, all of a sudden you're in violation because you dropped a pot or a pan or something.
Right.
Unless
so you're going to have an average.
Unless you describe what these characteristics are, what is the value we're talking about.
What's the fast or slow time constant?
That's how the meter's measuring. So depending on what sound you're trying to capture, you may want to put it on a faster or a slower setting. Similar to the weighting. Again, I think we're going for a pretty basic ordinance. We're sticking with the A weighted scale. The other common scale you see is C. And C is just, A is calibrated for the human ear. C is also human ear, but it's kind of skewed differently for higher end sounds, impulse sounds, explosions, and it kind of flattens out a lot more on the higher end than A does. So if you're specifically trying to target impulses, explosions, things like that, you wouldn't use A, you'd use C.
So let me ask a general question. Now, say we had a meter just like that one. How long would I have to set that up to get an average reading off of someplace to see if they're in compliance? Say there's an event going on, it's too loud, you think it's too loud, you set this up. How long do you need to actually take the reading to say there's an average of too high, an average sound?
Usually Anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes is usually what's measured to get your LEQ.
Okay.
And at the same time, you want to be logging those other, like when you download, you're reading right now, I'm just reading instantaneous measurements.
Right.
But if you were to hook it up to a computer and download what it's logging, you'd see the full description of the data set. So again, you would take that weighted time, so you have quieter times, louder times during any event.
Mhm.
So you want to get a large enough sample set so that you're comfortable saying, hey, on average, you know, you're at 62.
So 15 to 30 minutes.
Yeah.
roughly.
So how long of time can you store in that?
Oh, long time. Hours.
Hours, days?
Hours, yeah. Depending on what you, again, how you set it up, because again, if you are setting up to take a measurement every 3 seconds, every 1 second, you know, so if I was trying to describe the data set at a location in the hamlet or something, and I wanted to take it all day and do a 24-hour measurement, I wouldn't want to be logging data every second. You know, but if I was just going to do 15 minutes somewhere and I wanted to get a real good description, I could put it on fast in a second and capture everything. So again, you got to make a decision to take measurements with any instrument.
So then the.
No, go ahead.
So then you'd have to dump that information out on a computer?
Correct.
Well, if you just want the average, will it give you that?
Yeah, you could set it to just give you, you know, you could go through menus. It's a little cumbersome. It's not really set up for that. It's set up to get the data.
So in addition to buying the meter, we need to, well, we have computers available.
You have computers. It comes with software. You
Okay,
can load onto your machines. Yeah.
okay.
I mean, I think that the bulk of the use would be, you know, set it up 15, 20 minutes, okay, it's too loud, we have the data back up to download to computer, we let the people know it needs to be turned down.
Right,
That's
and you
what-
would know
we're not
when you're
looking for-
watching.
Yeah, we're
When
not
I'm
looking
taking
for-
sound measurements, I just pretty much stare at it. You got nothing else to do. You can't walk around, you can't rustle papers. You walking, stomping your feet around, changing measurements, so you pretty much have to stay put anyway. So at the end of the session, you know what the answer is. You're watching it going 56, 60, 60, 60, 60, you know.
So for the benefit of people who weren't here when you set this up, you know, you just basically took it out of the case, put it on the tripod, and, you know, plugged in the microphone.
Correct.
If you were to go to a site where you talked about setting it up as to how often you would want to take a measurement, how to do that, is that another couple of minutes to do that, or?
No, usually you set it up inside. You set it up in the office, you know, where it's comfortable and convenient for you. And then, you know, and again, you may just want to set it up and just leave it on a certain setting for, you know, what you want to
Right,
require.
right.
Take a measurement every 3 seconds, and you know, it's usually not that. I mean, I can't imagine there's going to be that much of a complicated case that you're going to
Right.
have to go back in and change your settings. You're going to set it once and probably just never change that setting ever,
Okay.
because you're not going to be looking at other. Today I'm looking at a gun range, tomorrow I'm, you know,
Right.
looking
right.
at musical acoustics inside of a building, and then the next day I'm checking out, you know, a sound complaint. You're going to be always,
Right. You're going to
Someone
kind of have
enforce
your
it.
own template,
Yeah,
basically, is what you're
exactly.
saying.
So those are things that you wouldn't normally see in a lot of other ordinances, you know. So that's why I wanted to point those out to you, what those are, what those mean. And then I went into kind of descriptions of, you know, generic. I mean, you see a lot of it. You can see it in other codes as well. Unreasonable noises prohibited. You know, these are kinds of noise situations that people don't think about. Again, when you set up the measurement, you know, you're going to be capturing sound on a scientific, mathematical basis, not on a who's making that sound basis. The meter doesn't care if it's a cricket or a dog, right? Again, we can take some of these things out at the board's pleasure, add things in. If you think some of these things shouldn't be unreasonable or prohibited items, we can expunge them from the document. I think the biggest thing, you know, again, I had some exceptions. That's another section you probably want to Obviously,
Sure,
emergency
doesn't it?
vehicles, things like that should always be accepted. Agriculture, I figured that, everybody would want to have
Back to
accepted.
the prohibited
Yep,
acts, Article 2, number F, we talked about in here, I haven't gone into much
mm-hmm,
detail yet about getting the ambient noise and then how much higher.
right,
In F, you've got an actual
right.
figure.
Yeah, I left that language in there. It's a good thing you brought that up. I left that in there as a comparison, because that's done a lot. So, a lot of places, a lot of towns will put a number in, such as like this, 65. If that's what the board would like to do, to set up a number like that, I mean, that's something that is done. I personally, am not a fan of those. And that's because it doesn't take into account the setting as it exists. It's strictly speaking to, we're going to let you generate a sound which added to the ambient sound is going to be 65 in this case.
But in some cases, if you have an applicant that's gonna have an event,
Correct.
they're gonna have to determine the ambient sound.
When you do your
As part
sound
of the
study,
process.
you determine
If
the
you got
ambient
something,
sound.
this is just general for the general population,
Mhm.
we don't have those unless we do the whole town.
Well, each site is site-specific, which is why I prefer, and again, it's for the board to deliberate on, coming up in one of the handouts I gave tonight, maybe a good time to turn over into that. If you look at the second page, at the bottom of that page, you have the human reaction increases the sound pressure level. So rather than saying 65 is too loud, why is 65 too loud? Again, right now I'm at 67, right? Again, I know I'm close to the meter, but just for, comparison, why not take a threshold and say, whatever the ambient is, we're going to look at it the way the human ear reacts to it. So in Clermont, for instance, your ambient sounds out here are going to be 35, maybe 40 in your louder neighborhoods. So 60, 65 is going to be, let's say, 20 dBs over what's out there ambient. If you go 10 over, that's twice as loud to us that are listening and hearing that sound, receiving that sound. So twice as loud doesn't seem very reasonable to me as a threshold to say, well, it's okay to be twice as loud as the neighborhood was before you came here. Wow, okay. But how about saying whatever the ambient is, we start to look and see, well, when do our ears tell us that's intrusive or that's a problem? And if you do that, then we need to start looking at mitigating, whatever the ambient is. If it's 30 and you go to 40, well, you just went up by 10. We've got a situation where you're going to have to mitigate so that you're not adversely impacting your neighbors. That type of
That's,
But a car going past or a truck is 80 or 90 decibel, right? So
if you're close enough, absolutely. Like right now, when I just said absolutely, it went up to 73 because my voice went up.
right.
Yeah,
So
but that's an instantaneous measurement. That would be
So
like
when
an
we talk
LMAX.
ambient, we're talking the L90.
Right, so for the ambient, we're going to be looking at an LEQ measurement. So what somebody would have to do is to say, here's this measurement I took. I set my meter up in the center of my property or wherever they're proposing a Mavis tire shop we'll use just for, it's a nice open field now. You set up, you take a measurement, and you say, okay, the ambient sound is 40. And then, well, what's the sound you're proposing to generate? How many bays do you have? How many tools are running at any given time?
And we'd be looking at the ambient again, not.
And
we
then they
wouldn't be
take that
comparing the
measurement
ambient to the L
and
count.
you add it
Right.
to that existing measurement. You can compare them. They don't add
Old
1 plus 1
ambient,
doesn't equal
right.
2.
Old
But-
ambient plus new ambient, you're saying?
Yep, and
Not-
that's when we
not
look and say,
ambient.
wait, you just raised the ambient for the surrounding receptors, adjoining landowners. And now instead of them having a sound level of, let's say, 35 or 40, now because you're in business and operation and you're generating sounds, now it's 50. What can you do to lower that back down, something that's not as intrusive to everyone around you? And that's, and they can. And
this
so
is
there's things they
ambient
can
at the
do.
This would be ambient at the property line.
Right. And that's, like I say, different approach than what a lot of towns do where they just say 65. Well, great, I'm not making 65. Super, I'm at 55, great, but the ambient was 40, so you're 15 over. So for a quiet neighborhood, that may not be the best approach.
But you're still talking about a business or an event activity that somebody's come in and gotten a special permit for, and they've had to measure the ambient in that area. But on some of those where you have a list of things that's throughout the town, you know, Joe Blow down the
Right.
road, and he hasn't gotten an ambient measure. So we go out and measure it after the fact?
But you can measure it after the fact, absolutely. Or you can come up with a different metric. In other words, again, if the board wants to, we
Well, I'm
can
looking
set
for
a
a
threshold.
recommendation,
Right.
or how that works with your recommendation, which sounds like it works well
Mhm.
on an application.
Well, for instance, let's say somebody's driving ATVs, dirt bikes, etc. And let's say that's something that we want to label as being, you know, these items that's going to be regulated, right? So plane comes in, they're saying it's too loud, etc., etc. So if you go out with a meter and turn it on, they're not running their bikes, you can get an ambient measure. This is the sound, okay? Call me when he's riding his bikes. So when they've got me and my 5 brothers, we're tearing through everything, and the neighbor calls up and says, they're doing it again. Oh, shit, boy, sir. I do have 5 brothers. Then you can come back up to your sound meter and turn it on, and the code enforcement officer say, hey, guys, I was out here yesterday and it was 30, and now you're tearing around and it's 85. We have a problem.
Well,
And that's the thing. And so some stuff has to be put in as to what is unreasonable, what is to be prohibited, and what is to be exempted. Do you want to tell me and my 5 brothers that we can't do that or not? And that's you know where it needs some input from you all.
So this number 65 you have in here, so you're saying you're roughly running about 60 or 65, roughly.
As I'm saying here, but I mean,
Well, you're right on top.
as I double the distance away from here, I'm going to drop.
So if this was on
About
the
6
property
decibels
line,
apiece.
if this was on the property line, you're talking, the sound people would hear would be roughly what we're hearing from you right now, from that distance, would be 60.
Wherever this is, wherever you put
Right
your
now.
meter from the generator, right? So from the sound source to the meter. If I double this distance, this number's going to go down by 6 decibels.
How about if everybody is quiet, except Sam tells us something, see what it reads? Go ahead, Sam.
What's that?
67.
Yeah.
So basically, at a property line, you're talking about hearing a conversation volume voice. It
Mhm.
would be roughly around 65 on a property line.
Right.
I mean, that
But
to
again,
me is
you
not
gotta see-
unreasonable.
you
If
gotta
somebody's
see where
having
it's
an
being
event, I
measured
don't think
from.
if somebody's
Right.
talking on a property line, it's
Mhm.
outrageous noise or, I don't think that's
Mhm.
too much. I mean, I certainly think that's acceptable.
Well, I wanted to set this up so you would see it. So you have a list, so you can see what these sounds are, and then get a real world number.
And you also proposed the hours, the operation,
And that's the other way you can do it, is you can not use the threshold number if you don't want to, and you can just put hours in of when you're gonna regulate. Right, so you can make it quieter at nighttime hours,
Would
10
echoing,
PM to 7 AM.
would echoing cause the dB level to fluctuate? Or is the sound level the same and echoing just
Well, they
creates
can
a
bounce,
longer
you can
span
get,
of time?
you can get sound to be reflective and come back,
But
depending
would
on
that
different
increase the
situations.
dB level?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this same conversation done outside without the walls around
Mhm.
us may not read 65 dB. It'd probably be
I'm
much
gonna
less.
measure that same, because for me to hear it's not
Well,
changing.
right,
The
right.
LEQ may be different, it may grab more sounds. But again, yeah, you can put up barriers that reflect things back versus absorbing them. For instance, in the winter, the ground is hard,
Well,
you have a lot of cloud cover, and you'll get a lot of that. No, you won't get absorption, you're gonna get everything more or less an echo, it's gonna bounce off and just keep moving. There's a lot of hardscaping.
Yeah, and things like water, you know,
Water, yeah, if you ever went up the Adirondacks and hooted or hollered across the lake, Water does not absorb sound, it just bounces and keeps
Right.
reflecting off of it.
I've camped out on the water, and the
And you
sound
can
from
hear-
across the water is
Mhm.
very clear.
Right, very similar to wintertime conditions. When the snow's up and you have a cloudy day, you'll hear a lot more than you normally would hear.
Okay.
Standing in the same location, grass, soft surfaces, the leaves tend to absorb
So
sound.
even if we're referring to a site where there are buildings or no buildings, they tend to make a difference.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, big time.
I think we're not looking so much to control people talking or yelling at each other a little bit, because there's a distance between them
Mhm.
on their property versus my property, as much as we're looking to control abnormal sound of, and when I say abnormal, that's maybe not the right word, but, you know, loud music.
Mhm.
If we had a gun range here,
Mhm.
you know, somebody with an automatic rifle shooting all day long.
Doesn't even have to be an automatic. If I had a
Well,
12
you
gauge,
get-
everyone probably has one. If I were to fire my 12 gauge right here with my meter, this thing would probably register about 160.
But only
That's why you gotta wear
once,
it.
whereas with automatic is continuous for a while, so you.
My
so
five
it's
brothers and I
big.
were very continuous. We'd shoot for hours.
But you get the point.
But I'm just saying, so that's one of those things that, you know, again, you want to think about maybe you know, do you want to list anything as being, I mean, like I put agriculture in here as being exempted, things like that. If it's customary, for instance, for people to ride their dirt bikes and you don't want to tell people not to ride them, you want to say it's okay to do that don't do it between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. or something like that, and not put a number on it, then that's, again, something to think about. Target shooting on private property, things of this nature. I mean, again, it's a rural town. So sometimes you gotta, if you set a threshold without parameters, and everything comes into it.
Well, agriculture would be sick,
Agriculture.
supersedes our
Right,
policy.
right.
Yeah, but it's always good to write it and say you're exempted from it.
So farmers would not be
Which
affected by this.
I exempted, yeah, ag equipment operating.
Well, I mean, I don't want to overcomplicate,
Well, that's what I mean.
overcomplicate things. I mean, we're
Yeah.
certainly looking for this to keep the, you know, offensive noises down. I
Mhm.
mean, that's one thing. And, you know, the numbers that you have in here, now, just curious, I know you've done this, what, 3 or 4 other towns?
Mhm.
Are they, went with similar numbers? I mean,
A lot of towns use 60 or 65, but again, if you have a quiet neighborhood, that could be an issue, and the other time it becomes an issue is if you have a loud neighborhood. So
Well, I
you're
mean,
already at 65.
if you're roughly
and
60,
then somebody
talking right there next to
essentially
it.
can't do anything
I mean,
because
I don't know.
their sound is going to raise it above the allowed level.
Well, if it's a loud neighborhood, you just can't have that loud music over with the neighborhood. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Well, it's a lawsuit,
Yeah.
because you have a zoning code and it says you can do a certain use, and you say this is the sound that's customary to the use you told me I can do, but now I'm in violation of this law, which says you can't generate a sound that causes a level above blah. You turn the meter on and say, I'm already at that.
One of the things, I don't recall exactly where I saw it, was about trash pickup. You limited the hours of that. I think you said to like beginning
Again,
at 7.
that was a conversation, I wanted to keep a little bit of a conversation of
Right,
how far are you going with the sound stuff, because some places regulate when
right,
that can or can't happen.
right. Because I've lived in plenty of places where you hear that dump truck or, you know, garbage truck at 5:30 in
Which
the
is why
morning.
people are putting it in their sound ordinances now.
And it's just
You can't do it.
You know, it was in a more rural setting and a more urban setting.
Right.
That's just kind of life, especially when it is warm, especially warm that a lot of, I know, highway or departments or, you know, Department of Public Works, they have their employees out earlier, so they're not out there in the heat.
Right.
I was just curious, you know, if you hear a lot of pushback from that.
Well, I exempted the town. But no, that is something that a lot of people are putting in, which is why I wanted to just,
Right.
you know, provoke a conversation of how far you're going.
Right.
Or do you want to go? What's the interest in going?
Right, and then the other
Because
one
these
that,
things are regulated, like right now, you're on one end of the spectrum. Don't make a sound that's not annoying to somebody,
right,
okay? And then you can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where they say,
right, right.
no garbage trucks allowed, the backup beeper can't be over this decibel, it can't in any case be
Right.
for more than 45 seconds, so it gets pretty complicated, but depending on where you want to go.
Can these, I'm just looking ahead on the penalties and offenses here.
Yeah.
Are these fees you put in here regulated by anything as far as the amounts you put in?
Just the
Because
town board.
To be, if somebody blatantly just says, hey, you know what, my people pay the extra couple $100 if I get a fine, or so what?
Mhm.
I'd like to see the fine have more teeth to it. So if somebody's
Right.
blatantly doing this and being very offensive to the neighborhood,
Right.
we could really slap them.
Right, and I think that's a good
$250
question
is not enough. I mean,
It's
if
a
they're
good
doing it,
question
if
for
they don't
Andy.
listen,
to say.
I'd like to see it go up to,
Right.
with this discretion,
We can go
$50 up to 1,000.
Yeah.
If they're blatantly saying, no, I'm not turning it down, well, then you can
Mhm.
hit them with something a little
Well,
harder.
you've got
And
the
if it is a
third-
site plan thing, and that's the other thing, is you can work
Third
it in where they
offense.
lose it.
Yeah, I think we
The
want.
third offense says fine no less than $250.
Mhm.
We should probably have a max on there, I mean, if you want to make it high, like Ray's suggesting.
Well, I want
The others have a, high, you've got 50 but not more than 250, 100 but not more than 250, then you've got not less than 250,
Mhm.
but maybe not more than 5,000, not more than 1,000,
Mhm.
not more than 260.
And the other, like I said, the other thing is you can tie it into site plan. If it does have a site plan for specific use,
Yeah.
you can tie it in the way you lose your site plan approval if you're a habitual offender.
Right, maybe that's under like the third offense, or something you lose, and then, you
And
lose your
once you
permit.
lose your permit, you're.
Yeah, I want to put some
You're in
teeth into
trouble.
it, because otherwise, I don't, it's going to be really hard to enforce this unless somebody's going to feel it,
Right, well, particularly when you have to.
Do you want to put a max in there on the third offense? And then add another paragraph that says, how George wants to word it, the habitual offender can lose their permit.
Yeah, I definitely think we should do that. Maybe like $2,500 max or something,
Okay.
and not less than $500, to start. Something like that.
So you don't like the not less than 250 on C?
No, because I think the minimum, it should be $50 to say 1,000, to give us the opportunity to set that fee if somebody is blatantly offending, disregarding the
Well,
law.
the judge would be the one that said.
Well, it gives him the authority to do that.
On a first conviction?
Yeah, because it could be anywhere from $50 if, if you do it by a mistake, obviously you make it low. Or somebody says, you know what?
I don't like putting that much discretion into it, because then it becomes a whole, he's just picking on me because he doesn't like me kind of deal. If it's a narrow range, you can justify it a little more easily.
I mean, I'd be okay with the 50 to 250 for the first conviction. Then if you get a second one, I mean, the first one, okay, I made a mistake, I'll do better. And then if you get a second one, you've also got the imprisonment in there also.
Well, I don't think we're going to go that far.
No, I mean, but the second one, you could up to 250 maybe. What do you think of that? What leave the 250 on the first one?
You're saying make the minimum on the second 250? I
No,
don't know about that.
no, fine of not less than 100, but not more than 250 for the second. Whereas the first one is 50 to 250, the second one would be 100 to, and the third one,
My feeling
Ray
is if
suggested
somebody's holding a
250 to
$10,000 event, they're not going to care about $250.
Right, right.
They're going to say, play the music. No, that's my feeling. Right? I think
That
we
would be
need
a
to have more-
business decision.
I think you need to have more teeth. That's my opinion.
I think having the loss of your site plan is the big ticket on commercial sites.
If you do for like a
If you
third
lose it, if
offense.
you lose your,
Yeah, I don't think you can do that on the first.
no, you can't do the first one. No, you
I would
have to
definitely like
first
to word it like
establish
the
that
third
you're
offense.
a
I think
habitual
that's-
offender. Yeah.
I guess I'd prefer to not build this in mind with someone's gonna be bad and we have to have a big fence up front. But if we do start running into this situation where there's someone running really loud events and we do it every month and it's become a problem, then we can adjust the law at that
Mhm.
point. But I don't feel comfortable with just going up front and saying, oh, we hit for $1,000 or whatever.
so you'd like to leave the second offense at 100 to 250? Or would you go up a little bit?
I would leave it at that, I think.
And the third or subsequent would be 250 to 2,500. And also a paragraph that says habitual violations is subject to loss of permit.
So that's up to us to decide. I think it should be higher, but I'm on vote.
Well, I know what you're saying, though,
Well, you
because
get.
if you're gonna make a lot of money,
$250.
250 is just, one of your expenses, it's like ice.
I mean, somebody can make a mistake the first
Is
time.
there a way to separate this out between, like a,
Well, that's why I would say instead of
Private
$50, it's a
commercial
mistake, you said
type of
$50, you give them a break, obviously, but if it's somebody that just says, we're just gonna keep blasting music, I don't care what you say, then you whack it for $1,000, that's how
If they make a mistake at the beginning of the season, and then they get another one at the end of the season, so it's 2 in a year, it could still be a mistake, but if they start doing 2, 3, 4 each year, they're doing what you're suggesting they might do.
Mhm.
So I would hit them I would suggest not too hard on the second. When we get to the third, and I don't know if we should have a time on that. The
It'll
third
have to
within a
have
year,
a
or
time.
the third within 10 years, or?
Well, I'll have to talk to Andy to find out what is legally defendable, because we'll have to define habitual offenses and put it in the definition section.
Okay.
So, we'll need to have something that we can take to court with, because obviously, if you pull someone's site plan, they're gonna
Right.
call their attorney and say they're suing, and that's when you wanna make sure you've got a record of, this is why we did that, we told you we were doing that, we hit you a $50 fine, a $250 fine, and $1,000, $2,500, whatever it was, and you don't listen, so we took your site plan away from you. That would stand, but
Now, taking the site plan away, taking the permit away, would that have to go to the judge also, or is that something that the zoning board or the planning board or the enforcement officer would do?
I think code enforcement would give them their cease and desist as far as operating, telling they're in violation per section, this, that, and the other thing. Any action would have to either be brought by, some actions can be brought by code enforcement. Other actions, I think the town attorney has to bring, depending on how they're phrased and, enshrined in the regulation or the law. It's, again, an important question to ask for Andy to answer.
so in a case where you have somebody who just likes to mow their lawn very early in the morning, they won't have a permit to pull.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right, and that's where those times come in to say, when can somebody make it, you know what I mean? So when's it
7
reasonable
a.m.
for Clermont? You guys probably have a good feel for when people start mowing their lawn early so they can get out and do other things.
and I can see even the possibility of that happening one time, and I wouldn't want to see, like a first offense, to have such a wide open area where somebody is hit with $1,000 fine for mowing their lawn.
And I've seen it pretty strictly worded, and where they've tried to go after commercial and separate out commercial versus residential. And a landscaper was penalized for doing a
Because
charitable act. He wasn't actually working, he was trying to do something prior to going to work for the day, take care of these other people. Again, for free, no money involved, no real commerce taking place, but it's the same vehicle, so it's got a sticker on it, you got a t-shirt on, it's the same mower, and the code enforcement officer, unfortunately,
Right.
dude, you're a commercial entity, you have a license, and our code says, so it's one of those things to think about. So when you start separating between residential and commercial, you got to think about how you want to do that. So, again, similarly, it could be on the other end of it, where you could be done working for the day as a carpenter or a mason or a landscaper, come home and try to do something at your house, where your neighbor can do it because he's a resident, right, or non-commercial, but now you do it and someone calls and says, there's a lot of noise coming out over there.
Right.
Sorry, you are a commercial entity. So there's,
Right.
Setting-
pros and cons to everything.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah.
Setting hours of operation, be a little tricky too, because you get somebody that works nights and sleeps during the day, and they got a neighbor next door. It was the thing, it just happened to be in the paper today, but a situation where a person would tell their neighbor what shift they were on, they various shifts, and the neighbor just didn't pay any attention, which he didn't have to, there wasn't any law. So one day, he got off shift and he got home at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was starting to get light out, so he started his lawnmower. And after that, the guy paid attention to when the other guy was out.
4 in the morning is a little early.
Well, he was doing it to make a point
Right.
to his neighbor that never paid attention to when he was gonna be sleeping.
Sure, yep.
All right, well, I guess, the first question, does anybody have any other questions about the decimal level? We're talking about, a conversation level at a property line. I don't really feel that that's, I feel
Seems
that's,
low, yeah.
I mean, that seems pretty low, but I mean, I think that's acceptable. I don't think you should have to list somebody yelling on your property line, so I mean, that seems like an acceptable level.
Mhm.
So I think the number you have is probably right on the money. I don't have an issue with that. The times, I don't have an issue with. I mean, that's a good thing to have times on there. The only other thing was the fines, I think, and the rest of this, a lot of this is just legal language, but I mean, the fines.
The conversation level, but then how much additional, the ambient level can be one thing, but how much additional.
Well, I don't
music
know if I
can be-
would personally be concerned with that. I mean, I don't care if the ambient level's high, I mean, it shouldn't be any higher than the conversation level at your property line.
Well, the level that gets enforced is the sound that's being generated added to the ambient. So like when we do our studies during site plan reviews,
Right.
I measure the ambient. So I know what that measurement is. Then I get data to describe the sound that my applicant wants to make, right? So someone comes in and says, I have a wedding venue, I want to do this. We say, well, how loud's that going to be? So they have to give us data of that. Either go to another wedding venue or come up with some published industry accepted data, take these measurements, and then come and say, well, now with this measurement happening here, and with the ambient being what it is this far away, I can tell you how much that sound drops, the attenuation, and I can also then say, when I add that to what the ambient is there, the new sound is going to be X. So that would be the sound. That would be, you can't have that over 65 or 60. And that's the way that works. It's not that you get to make 65 as the applicant.
Right. I mean,
The
I don't
sound
care if you're
at that
making
property line can't.
200 across the street at my property line,
Right,
it shouldn't
at
be
your
over
property line,
65.
it shouldn't be
I
over
think that's all
65.
we're really concerned about. I don't,
That's the way that
the,
works.
the surrounding property areas, I mean, so I don't care if
So
it's
you wanna-
above the ambient level at your
You
property
want
line.
to set a maximum number in the law as opposed to measuring the ambient and saying it
I
can be
think so.
10 over, or 15 over, or 5 over.
I think so.
Or you could make it an either or, where you say,
I think it's a
you have to
simplest
be
way
under
to go.
65 or the ambient plus, what were we saying, 20 or 15?
You're getting into a lot of measurements, a lot of different stuff that you gotta do to actually come up with that, where it's this at the property line and that's it. I mean, I think it's the simplest way to go for me. I mean, I don't know, I'm looking at it maybe a little
But
simpler.
It's a simple way to go, yes.
But
But is
What
it
I'm thinking of
going
is
to
the
be more
noisy
complicated?
neighborhood
Yeah.
option. If we have a neighborhood that the ambient is already at 65 for whatever reason, then you add, maybe he's only doing 75 inside of his property, but that bumps it up past the mark.
If you got a garage that's, using an impact wrench that's making a lot of sound, or running an engine at full speed to see how it works, or if he's gonna let somebody come in to get their muffler fixed and it's making noise coming in but not going out. If you set an absolute maximum, you may want to, the ambient sound for that area would be a little higher because it's already there. A garage that's working every day.
You're talking about an existing garage?
Yeah, or even a new one that's gonna have a higher ambient
Well,
level.
the ambient's what exists before they start.
Yeah.
So if it's a new garage, the sound level's gonna increase because the garage is there working, presumably.
But the type of work that's being done might, and if we allow that type of work in that zone,
Mhm.
then if you cut them down on the noise to below what they would normally do, then you kind of cut their business out.
Well, what they have to do, like I've seen some go in some pretty residential areas because, hey, here's the end of the residential, beginning of the commercial. Someone has to buy that. And then sometimes they want to put in automotive repair, which is one of the louder things you can do. Now you're right next to the residential area, so it becomes a very sensitive receptor, and what they end up usually doing is having to close their doors and put in acoustic materials when they do their construction, instead of cement blocks that vibrate and conduct sound. They line it with material that absorbs sound and keep their doors closed, as opposed to having all your bays open and the sound just going out. And that usually actually attenuates the sound to bring it back down to where it's reasonable for the residences that are surrounding. But you only find that out after you do the study, because of course nobody wants to put in the absorbent material or agree to close their door, because it creates, higher construction costs, and, now I have to have an AC running because I have my bay doors closed. So that's where the study comes out.
Get ventilation through in the summertime when it gets hot also,
You need an exhaust fan now to get those air exchanges.
which adds to the noise.
Yeah, but that noise is much lower,
No,
much quieter, the fan running than hearing the torque wrenches going and the hammers, and I cut the muffler off and it hits the floor. Ka-bang!
I got the impression that you were kind of leaning towards recommending ambient plus as opposed to an actual number.
That's my-
Suggesting that an
But
actual
again,
number.
it goes both ways. I've seen it done in both ways. And some places get it complicated and pick out a use and qualify which method for which use. I think that gets very complicated and gets a lot of arguments later of, well, it's not the way I interpret that use. Why am I in that? I want to interpret it this way. It's a different way of looking at it. So I think we should just pick a way. But it's one of the board to unhear both methods and then pick a method that you think is right.
I mean, I
for you
guess,
guys.
if the ambient level in the neighborhood was 80, and we're setting this at 65, maybe say, we pick the number and/or no more than the ambient level
I
of.
mean, you're not gonna have a neighborhood that loud.
No, you wouldn't
Your
have,
your
but-
neighborhoods are gonna be
I'm
quiet.
just saying, you still don't want that level, I don't care what the ambient noise is in anybody's, you don't, at the property lines where you want to make sure it's less than, acceptable, super
Right.
acceptable, so. I mean, I think it's just simpler to put a number on it, but, I mean,
If we put a number on it, do we run the risk of basically saying that businesses which up until now were allowed permitted in a particular area would no longer be permitted because there's no way that they can mitigate the noise to that level? I can't.
Well, they could get a variance. I believe I did have a language in there for a variance.
Yeah, I'll talk to Bill about that
Yeah,
also.
right. So that's always an option with any regulation. You can always go to the ZBA
Mhm.
for a variance, say, listen, there's no way. I mean, and I've seen it particularly with like restaurants that have outdoor spaces. And
Right,
they're small, they tend to be in hamlet, village type areas, urban areas.
10-foot
There's
wide.
just no way you can attenuate that sound. So they need a variance where someone else would, we'd say, well, you've got room, do something to help your neighbors out.
right.
But again, that's a case-by-case basis, as all variances are. And usually with sound, on any project, the two best ways to mitigate that sound are duration and frequency. So how long is this sound going to be generated, and how often do you plan on making it? So, every day of the week, once a month, so if you're in like I said, a restaurant or someone with an outdoor activity and you're gonna bring some band in once a month or every other month, and it's all gonna be shut off by a certain time, towns, villages, et cetera, say, okay, well, we're gonna let that happen. We understand it's a big draw for you in the summer or something. You're not doing it every day, don't think you're doing it twice a week, so you nail it down for, and it
And
has
the
to be shut
variance
off at
can-
a certain time, and that's really easy for code enforcement, because he doesn't have to measure anything, he just comes out and says, unplug,
Right.
you're done.
And the variance can also specify maximum level that it could go to also, right? I mean, it might be higher.
Well,
than-
absolutely, you
than the law, but it's
can
not
raise
just-
it higher, but
it's
not as
just
high as they
It's
want.
not just giving you a variance to do whatever you want, we're giving you a variance to go.
Like I say,
This much.
variances are, case-by-case basis, whatever the zoning board feels is appropriate at that point in time for that specific use.
Which brings me to the other point that we talked a little bit earlier today, that you've got the planning board doing variances in here, that really, we really would like to.
Yeah, the zoning board, right, yeah.
With the understanding that planning board does get to look at and ensure compliance when they do site plan review.
For site plan, right.
You know, that would still be done, but as far as the actual special permit or variance,
Mhm.
we go to ZBA.
Do you have a read on how much of an extra burden it would be for people going through our zoning or planning boards to collect measurements, or is that a big impact, or it's relatively small?
It could be a few $1,000s, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, really. I mean, similar to basically a septic design, I mean, $2,000 to $3,000. It should, you know, unless they're doing something really big, which gets complicated, but again, at that level, they've got a lot of money in the project, it's different.
Right.
You know, the more
Still
complicated, the
significant.
bigger the level of the project, the
Yeah.
more significant the answer. You know, sometimes you can do it, what I call a desktop study. You have published data that is known in the industry. You can say, well, this is the sound I'm gonna make. You could say a standard neighborhood of this type and these characteristics has this sound. If the board, whoever's reviewing, zoning board, planning board, et cetera, says, well, yeah, we, you know, similar to every other project, it's a case-by-case basis. If they accept that data and it's decided that that's okay, then you're left, you know, that's a much lower, you know, effort on the designer's part, obviously. The more sensitive a receptor and the more, you know, the closer you need to take a look at things. You know, so that's when you start taking real measurements. You know, historical sites, cemeteries, nursing homes, churches, schools, there's sensitive receptors, and a lot of times where that comes from is the public hearing. When you bring in the public and stuff and you start asking, you know, try to find out, well, what are we looking at? And you got some sensitive sites that people sometimes are unaware of. And then we go, well, that's, you know, hey, we need to have some measurements, and we can't go with textbook numbers. Let's see what we're really dealing with, because it's important to get it specifically right. And again, like every other site, you know, every other regulation, as you apply it, it's always applied on a site-by-site basis to a certain extent.
Yeah. All right, so at this point, George has got some input to review it, and we'll take another look at it.
Yeah, I'd like to draft it up, and then we can circulate that, once we get these, what we talked about, maybe to change it, we'll circulate it, we'll set a public hearing for next month, go through, get public input on that as well, and then we can make a decision at that point.
Have we had any comment back from Sam, the code enforcement officer, on this policy?
We gave a copy to look at.
I didn't hear anything from him, but I didn't specifically ask him, like, he did.
I did ask him the other night if he had looked at it, and he said he was going to.
And you want me to make these corrections and then get it over to Andy Howard?
Let him put his approval on it, and then we can circulate it to the public and put it out for public. Like I said, I still would like to set the public hearing for next month. I think we got enough information together, and then, you know, we can get that set and go from there.
I'm thinking some of these, I'm not really sure that's together to the point that we could set a public hearing. I don't know that we've decided as a board whether we're going with a single level or going with the ambient. And then, this is the first time I've had a chance to look through it, but some of the items on the unreasonable prohibitions, I think maybe we might want to tweak or remove.
I
And
think
some of the
we should wait
exceptions as well.
1 month for a public hearing. I think
We'll wait till the following
we
month.
should have more time to circulate and discuss ourselves.
That's fine.
Just a suggestion, it's never too early to open a public hearing.
That's true.
They might have comments and things that you want to
Well,
include.
One of the things I was gonna mention, we got quite a few people here tonight, more than we usually do, probably because they knew this was coming up. And they've been very good, not trying to take it when it's not a public hearing, but there is a public comment period at the end. So if somebody's has something really burning in their mind that they want to say. they can-
You know, I was actually gonna allow that right now, just while we're on
That's good.
it, just because before we go through the whole meeting, while George is still here, someone, I'm gonna take off when we're done with this, so. I will open this up to the public for questions or comments at this point, as far as what we're doing, if you have any input before we get this ready to go to comment.
I'm still not clear as to which methodology you're supporting. an absolute number in decibel levels, 65 as you talked about it, or an ambient level determined by the LEQ method, and if there's a variance, if there's a decibel level that's above that, you have to specify what that level is to establish the violation. There are two separate methods. They're not combined. You can't combine them. And it's not clear to me which one you decided to incorporate into the ordinance at this point of your discussion.
Yeah, I think that's what Evan was
Yeah.
saying.
Right.
I don't think
It's
so.
exactly what Evan was saying.
I just want to verify that.
Yeah.
Good, all right, so I'm reading that correctly.
I think based on Ray's input, I didn't hear anybody disagreeing with that. I questioned a little bit, but I think we're looking at a set level, right?
I think it's the simplest way to
Easier-
go,
easier way.
personally, that's just my opinion. I mean, I really do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, which way?
I think it's a set limit, and that's it. I mean, I think that's the simplest way. If your property line is over this amount, that's offensive to you, then it's above the code. So I think it's the easiest way to go, simplest.
We should also set daytime, nighttime, time limits.
Well, that,
10
Well,
to
you have the
7,
time, you
7
have
to 10. I'm saying
time.
you're okay with those times? in other
Yeah, I
words?
mean, you said 7 to 10, 7 PM, or 7 AM to 10 PM.
Yeah.
What did they have fireworks?
When I read through here, it looked like you didn't have any daytime limit, it's just a nighttime limits. Currently,
That's what I'm
right?
saying,
We do the fireworks.
so if we're gonna do a set,
No,
specifically if we're gonna
they
do a
bring
set,
stuff
we should
up.
set daytime and nighttime. Like daytime might be 65, and nighttime might be 50,
Right.
55, something.
What's the cricket's
Well-
going on?
Well, if I were doing a measurement in sound, right, and we were doing these daytime averages, nighttime averages, you get penalized 10 decibels for your nighttime. So if 65 is our daytime, then 55 would be the nighttime.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're looking at here only has nighttime limits in place with no
Right.
daytime, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying, is if we're going that method, I didn't know what method we were going, so I just kind of gave a flavor of each method, and I wanted to have this conversation, so
Right.
the board could understand both methods and then tell me which way you wanted me to go. If we're going that way, then like I said, the 65 would be a daytime, then nighttime would drop to 55 or lower, as you may see fit, but
And
at
if
least
we,
55.
if we find out over time that it's too much of a burden
You could
to the
do
population, we can raise them. If we
You
find
can
out that
it lower
it's
and
not
raise them.
helping, is what we want to do,
Mhm.
we can lower.
Right, or
It's a policy update.
go back to the other method, yeah,
So-
absolutely.
The decibel limit drops by 6 for each doubling the distance from the source.
Between the source and the generator, or so between the meter and whatever generated the sound. Right,
So
so
when
that's
we're
why it's
talking-
always important to know how far away it is when someone says, here's the measurable,
Right.
what was that distance? So it's this loud at 10 feet, or was this loud measured 50 feet away?
So when we're talking a 65 limit at the property line, it's going to be substantially less for the person who's inside the house sleeping.
Correct.
So I'm not sure if we would really need like a 50 limit at night. If someone's trying to get sleep and it's the level of conversation on the property line, I mean, that shouldn't keep you up, in my mind anyways.
Well, sometimes.
Most people have AC.
Don, you have a question?
You know, it's okay with that, however, when they have fireworks and that's one's gonna shoot out of the sky, and the people next to them are gonna hear it banging and banging. So what happens there?
That's a special occasion, I mean, we're not.
Do they get a special permit?
You can get a variance, I mean, you know, if somebody calls and complains, I mean, that's a one-time thing, unless you shoot fireworks off every weekend, and then you can have a problem,
But
but, no.
what we're doing here though, that's for the, what is it, the L90 level? So if somebody shoots off a firework, that wouldn't trigger this limit as we currently have it, right? Or it likely wouldn't unless you're shooting a lot of them.
You'd be shooting a lot of them, right. But again, if it was a town-sponsored event or something of that nature, you could exempt it. If it was a local business or what have you that wanted to do it, like you say, a one-off permit,
Right.
you know, you can get
Special
those.
occasion
You can,
permit.
and you can issue those.
Could you put in a slightly higher level for holiday events?
Well, again, if it's a special permit, you can,
Well,
Adjust.
without a special permit, just in the law, like 4th of July apply and.
If you want to overcomplicate it, I think it's just easier to
Yeah,
get
well,
special
exactly, then you
permit.
start,
Yeah,
Have
that's
your
just,
code
it's
enforcement
up for
officer
special
on
permit.
vacation during the fourth.
you start getting.
I don't want to make this too complicated. I mean, it's
Well,
gonna be
that's what I was trying to
complicated.
not, yeah.
You know what, how about Clermont Day? You have a band there.
Yeah.
You get a special permit,
Right.
okay?
One-time thing, it's done by
It's
5 o'clock.
it's a red alert,
Right.
okay? Before we came up here, we rented a place in Germantown. And there was a wedding that went around the corner, and it was at night.
Mhm.
But it happened to go on and on and on. And there were some houses there and trees, but there were electronics involved besides a live band. So the live band left and the electronics
Continue.
went on
Mhm.
and on. So you made everything really very, very clear
Mhm.
as to ambient noise, nighttime noise, and
Mhm.
things like that. And I think you mentioned something, Ray, about being proactive before we get more restaurants, more business here, so people know what to expect. There's no burden on anybody yet, but there will be a burden. So I just want to leave you with that thought.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Again, I would encourage you to make a distinction as to which methodology you're going to employ. That's very, very important. Secondly, I think it's important that you distinguish day and night. And Kevin, you make a very good point. You have to distinguish those very clearly. You might want to introduce a third time, day, evening, and night, for greater clarity. And when you go to decibel levels, go back to your point about sleep, Evan. 35 decibel levels on the A scale is normal sleeping time. A conversation, 40, 45, will keep somebody awake. And that's in the research literature. So when you're talking decibel levels on the A scale, it's very important to know that that's the scale you're using versus an ambient and then an additional level of noise, because that additional level really does increase significantly. 3 decibel levels is the range in which we'll hear a distinction. Over 5 on the A range is a noticeable distinction, and over 10, it's really loud. That's a huge difference. So the 2 scales, the 2 methodologies are absolutely critical. And I'd also like to have the board attend to the instrument that's being used. You can have a very simple instrument to a very complex instrument. I don't know, George, which one we're using here, but I'd like to make sure that whatever instrument the town uses is ANSI certified, and better yet, NSTI certified, so that you know exactly what the validity is of the decibel level that you're measuring on either the A scale or the ambient level if that's your methodology. And it's very important to have a very good instrument.
Right, when you take the measurements, like with this unit, type 1, it actually comes with calibrating. So if I was taking measurements that I wanted to be enforceable, I would actually put that on, turn it on, and it would calibrate, and I would see a readout. And then when I was done taking my measurements, I'd put it back on, and you would note what's called drift. So you'd see what was it when you started, what was it when you ended, and then you know what you did. And there's ANSI standards and other standards that tell you you're supposed to do, point 1, point 2. Basically, you're assuring that your instrument's working. So someone can't say, well, I don't think I was that loud. You get a speed taker from a cop, and I wasn't going that fast. Prove it. How do I know your radar gun works?
Right.
Similar thing. You have to have the right instrument, and we have to know it was calibrated. But it does come with the equipment. You put it on, you do it, and then, every once in a while you should send it out as well. Back to the manufacturer, they certify, they send you back a nice certificate that says it was in, we certified it. Everything's working, the calibrator's working, everything's right.
Then when we send it back, we can't enforce anything for one period of time.
Well, it's just if you're gonna end up issuing violations and potentially taking actions, you wanna make sure that your equipment's right and that it wasn't that over time it's fallen out of calibration and it says it's at 60, but really it's 50. Or it's 70 and you're measuring 60. it goes both ways.
Is that something we should put in the,
Yes.
in the?
Well, that's something that comes
Not
with using the
necessarily
equipment.
saying that we're gonna use a particular instrument, just that we would use, a certain, you know,
Certified.
an instrument that.
It should either be a type 1 or a type 2, and I
Right.
can add that in. Because it's important for people who are doing the sound measurements to satisfy the requirement. And that's something that I could also add in as an addendum or something. I'll talk to Andy to find out if a sample, you know, of protocol, if you will. This is,
Right.
if we decide to invoke this at a board level, and they say you need to do this, what does that mean? And what instrument do we expect you to use, not yourself on?
George, you made an excellent point, and so did you. Well, you made an excellent point. So, Dawn, instruments may change over time, so maybe something should be put in the regulations that a professional in some aspect like that should take the measurement. Because what if the instrument changes and
Right.
find something? So maybe a
Well,
professional.
I think someone who's maybe trained to use the
Someone
instrument,
who's trained,
I
right.
don't think we have to make an outside hired person.
Well,
They're usually
unless that's-
engineers,
I wouldn't-
engineers, architects.
You know, like, I could get this instrument tomorrow, and I may
Code
not know
enforcement
what I'm doing.
officers.
I just think someone who is trained to do it.
Right, no, I'm
Right.
not disagreeing completely, I'm just thinking that if somebody is trained in how to use the equipment, it doesn't mean that we can't use that person, that we have to go hire someone outside of that realm. If somebody is trained on how to use it, I don't see any reason why they can't use it.
Yeah, you're
Okay,
right.
It's pretty simple to use once somebody has it set up for you, in particular. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can set it up, but once it's set up for what you're taking, the template measurement, if you will, you know, turning this thing on and using it, the procedures are pretty simple. And again, it's all documented, which is what's nice, because it's printed out, you know, it downloads to the computer, you print it out, and you can see exactly what it is that somebody measured. You can't really, I mean, I can tell you, we review in like 30 towns, so I'll ask when I see something, where's your raw data? Why do I have to give you that? Because I asked for it. Where's your raw data? And that's telling me what you measured and what you find when somebody wants to do something silly, is they manipulate the data. And you can't manipulate the raw data. This is what it measured, this is what it prints out.
Right.
Hey, how'd you get from here to there? I can do the math. You know, and so that gets to qualified professionals, which is the problem. Some people don't behave professionally. But people who have the equipment and do it are usually, like I said, you don't find contractors doing it, you don't find just Joe Blow doing it. You know, you hire an engineering firm. But again, even at that, it's our practice for all studies that we review. We want the raw data. Give me the inputs, because anyone can make a nice report and tell you, look at the table, look what it is. Backup documentation.
All right, well, I think we have,
This
well,
gentleman, I think, has
one more question.
One last observation. I mean, the distinctions are very important here, and the greater the clarity at this point in the deliberation, the better the policy is going to be. So there's just one last differential that you might want to consider, and that's residential versus commercial. You really never finished that conversation, and I think that's important to do, make a distinction, and then have different levels of sound relative to those two environments, day, evening, and night as well.
You actually addressed that, didn't you? Yeah, I saw that, didn't you?
I
We
don't
talked
have-
about it.
I don't have a copy of that.
Neither do I.
Industrial property is 75 dBA, which I don't see.
Right.
75 for commercial
Like I
property?
said, we're gonna take that refuse section out.
That's a very high number.
Are there any extra copies of that?
Nobody knows copies.
We did not circulate copies, because this was just a very rough draft. It's not something we were ready to release to the public, because we have obviously lots of questions and
Just
changes.
asking.
Yes. So, at this point, we're gonna hold off on a public hearing for another month or 2 months, so we have plenty of time to make these changes. Once we get something that is acceptable to the board, we'll release it obviously before the public hearing, so everybody can take a look at it and come in and have comments at that point as well.
So it'd be 2 months.
It's gonna be 2 months.
Okay.
That'll be next
That
month.
would be March,
Be April's meeting.
April.
So, I think we have,
Will there be a note on the website when the draft is available?
we could certainly put that on there, absolutely. We could probably post the draft once we have it ready. I don't like to put draft material out, this weekend because it's not official, so we can put this out. Yeah, we'll put the draft.
The draft on
Yeah,
it.
we could do a PDF and mark it draft or preliminary or something, and that way it'd be easy to look up.
George, one last request. You put page numbers, you've got section numbers, get them a little confusing to actually, somebody's gonna look at page 4 or 5. and-
Sure. Yeah, we'll have page numbers for the final document.
And then we can include anything from the attorney, what he feels as well, and then we
Right.
can take a look at that and go over this again.
Yep.
And we'll work on it, because, we don't need to move on off this subject tonight, there's plenty of stuff to go over, but, I think we have enough to, Evan, I know you mentioned there's a couple things you didn't like, you want to take a good look at that, maybe email it to me, or we'll forward them on to George.
Email them,
And we'll
yeah.
to get that as well to the next round, or talk about it at least. Okay, all right.
All right.
Well, thank you, George, I
Thank you.
appreciate you coming in tonight,
No problem.
going over this with us and producing this. And you'll get this to Andy and go through the changes.
I'll make the changes tomorrow or Wednesday and then send it right over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so let's get started with our regular meeting. What we'll do is start with our approval of town board minutes. We have a few sets to go over. We have our January 2nd meeting, which was our regular town board meeting and our organizational meeting. Want to make a
Move to approve.
second?
Second?
All in favor?
Organizational and regular.
Yeah, we did them together. Approved. Okay, we also have our January 13th meeting to review the policies of books. Any corrections, comments? I'll entertain a motion. Approved?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Okay, Mary, let's start with you, clerk report, please. Sorry.
Town Clerk's report for January 2018. Obtaining fellowship for the community house lease, $1,000. Dog licenses, $27.50. Town clerk fees for solid waste, $4.50. And for vital statistics, $10. Total check for the general fund, $1,042. Trusted agency for an escrow for the planning board, $27.52. Total check for trust and agency, $27.52. Paid to New York State Department of Ag and Markets for dog license surcharges, $11. Paid to the Columbia County Solid Waste, $55.50. So the total for January, $1,136.02.
Very good. Motion to accept the clerk's report.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Mary. Mail review. You got a couple things?
I do have a few things. The Columbia County Department of Health free rabies clinics, but donations are accepted. Dogs must be on a leash, cats and ferrets must be in carriers. Breeders must use their own veterinarian for rabies vaccinations. So I have the schedule, it's posted on the website, and it's posted here, and I can give a copy to anyone if they want it. But one will be held in Ankrum, that's one in Germantown, one in Greenport, one in Ghent, New Lebanon, Cloverwick, and Kinderhook. So it runs from March 10th to November 3rd, different weeks. And so it is posted on the website if anyone needs that. And we have a public notice from the town of Red Hook, and this would be a local law to amend the zoning law regarding subsurface utility systems. That hearing will be held on February 13th at 7:35 p.m. at the town hall, which is on Broadway. And then we had an email from a town resident, excuse me, just a short message to thank all of the men who work in the highway department. You have done an exceptional job this year, and it has not been easy because of the alternating freezing and thawing. You have maintained our roads and kept them cleared with minimal to no property upheaval. Thank you for all your work and efforts in ensuring we can safely drive on our roads. It is so very much appreciated. From Linda. That's all I have.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was nice.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Okay, correspondence for the web committee. Do you have any comments, questions, suggestions that we're going to address in a little bit, I think, anyway? Okay, if there's no comment on that, we'll move on. I hate to do this, but we do need to take an executive session for literally probably 5 minutes to discuss personnel issues with the highway department. So I'd like a motion to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Meeting in a few minutes.
That's wrapped. It's in my yard.
Oh, yeah.
And the insurance company is pretty much done with it. So if you guys want to do a rotation on car, you just
Motion
have
to
to take
come
away.
So moved?
We got a moving motion.
Second.
Chris, second? Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Well, I do, I just took two.
Okay, let's move on to committee reports. Bob?
Yeah, not too much, just wanted to mention, and I think you've got on the whole business anyway, but we did sell the truck, we got 15.2.
Okay.
All right, I don't know if Jimmy's if we got a check yet or if the truck's
Yeah.
been delivered, but the bidding did go to, we did get our 15,000 we were hoping for, and considerably more than the 13,000 we were and I'd like to just echo the letter that was sent in about highway department, they haven't done a good job. Looks like we're in pretty good shape for salt and sand. I went back there the other day and it was filled up.
I just bought some, yeah, just filled it up. No,
I don't know how we're going to cost for that.
don't ask. I don't know yet either. I mean, he's obviously eating up some salt this year. I don't know how much, depends how the rest of your place out there. Don't know. Yeah, very good. Evan?
I didn't receive any correspondence in the past month, and I guess we had talking about the committee later on in the schedule, so nothing else from me.
Okay, perfect. Chris, you got anything?
No, nothing.
All right. Dawn?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. All right, old business, just a couple updates on some of this. The CEO, code enforcement officer requested a set of updated books for the ordinances, and what we did is we ordered them, they actually came in, and that voucher was in there for the enforcement tonight. So they are here, and they've been taken care of, he's happy. The website, we've talked about this the last few months, we put a call out for volunteers. And I would like to appoint that committee at this point so we have, so we can start working on this and try to update and see what's available and what we can do and what we can't do with our website to make it a little more user-friendly and acceptable to everybody. So obviously I'd like Evan, which is the webmaster, to chair this committee, subcommittee. But I also want to appoint a couple of the members, and I don't know, you said you only had 2 people interested?
I haven't received anybody else who's had interest.
Okay. Those 2 people were, I know Sarah was one of them.
No, Dana Matthews and Marie Kaiser.
Yeah.
Those two, and you can add me as well.
All right. So we got-
Dana,
Dana Matthews.
Matthews,
And Maura Kaiser.
Maura.
Kaiser, Sarah, and I think to round it off, Chris, would you mind serving on that as well? Make it even, maybe we have 5 members and make it
Sure.
help out a little bit.
Yep,
All
absolutely.
right. There you go. So Evan, I'll leave it up to you. Do you have contact information for those?
Yeah, I do.
I'll send you once
Okay.
more.
If you want to reach out when you're available, try to set up a meeting when, the bulk, the majority can get together.
Sure.
Kick off meetings, see what you can come up with, come up with some ideas, see what we can work with.
Sure, yep.
And I'll leave it up to you to schedule that.
Okay.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay. Bob just mentioned the highway truck has been sold. The auction closed last week, week before. And we did get $15,200, which is actually right about where we thought we would be. We did set the minimum, we would accept lower than that, but we're happy to get the 15.2. I know the check is on the way. I do have the confirmation that the purchase went through, so we're all set. We'll just wait for the check. Park development. Now, we've been talking obviously for several months now. The PDC is finally done. We hope they're done with the project over here. What I'd like to do is put out a request for people that are interested in, as well as in helping out on the Park Development Committee. Again, I'd like at least one board member, Bob, to probably chair this subcommittee, and maybe 5 or 6 individuals that may be interested in helping out. But, I know I asked Mary already. There's a few people. There's an architect, landscape engineer that we also would like to solicit. There's a few that we're going to hand solicit to make sure we get some qualified individuals on this subcommittee as well. But, we certainly are going to accept some volunteers.
What would be the goal of this committee?
The goal would be to get together, come up with some starting points, some ideas on where we want to start. It's going to be with certain parts of the trail, Veterans Monument, what we're going to actually do with the property. Just generalizations, we have a starting point somewhere. So we have some, general ideas from Scenic Hudson, which helped us out, but it needs a lot more work, a lot more fine tuning to see where we're going with this. So, but we do have money. We've been collecting money. We've had generous donations from several people. Thank you, Mary, and others that have donated. But we
How much do you
certainly.
have?
The balance now is roughly, doesn't have the last one in here, $20,000 to start with. And we can also solicit more grants as well, and we do have other funds available if needed. So we do have some money to get started with. So the first point is to try to reach out, see who's interested. Please contact either Mary, the town hall, myself, let us know, and we'll certainly put together, like I said, I'd like to probably maybe 7 on that committee if we could. And we'll start arranging meetings in the next few months at some point. We'll get going on that. Okay, new business. Public hearing for the noise ordinance, we're going to wait on that for another month, so let's scratch that. I do want to, the next resolution was for the permit fee schedule. As we met last month and went over the policies and fees, we discussed this briefly about updating the fee schedule. The code enforcement officer gave us the breakdown of some updated fees that we thought was fair. We reviewed these, we went over it. Many of them stayed the same, a few of them did change a little bit. I certainly think they're fair. I think the board as a general thought it's fair upgrades to fees. So what I'd like to do is pass a resolution amending resolution number 35, 2018, from our organizational meeting, with one exception, as Bob pointed out. On the second page of the fee schedule, there's a paragraph that should be removed. It says, with regard to the fees imposed. That whole paragraph should come out. That's old from when we had the fee schedule and inspections separated. So that should be struck right out of that.
Right, I have a question. I wasn't able to participate in the discussion on the 13th, I guess.
Yes.
But one of the questions I had was regarding, under the old fee schedule, the inspector had to inspect multiple times. There was a per inspection fee, whereas with the new, wasn't clear to me how that would be handled.
It's all incorporated in the fee you pay. So if
you pay up front,
you
whatever
pay
it
that
is.
fee up front, if it requires 3 inspections or 8 inspections, that's all included.
But if an inspection fails, has to be repeated, then at some point there should be another charge.
I think he said he lets, if it doesn't pass for some reason, one inspection or something, he lets it go. But if it's multiple fails, he has to come back several times for no reason, then there is an additional charge.
Okay, is that listed somewhere?
That I don't
remember seeing that.
I don't remember what he said he would do with that. I think it's under, actually, I don't know what he was going to do with that. He didn't have that listed. Because he says, 9 out of 10 times, mostly everybody knows what they only pass. If it's a
I
simple
imagine that's not a
failure, it
big
goes
problem,
back, but if
but-
it's complete numerous violations, then there would be additional charges, but we do not have that listed, you're right. I'll have to ask him what he recommends for that, and we could always add that. So what I'd like to do
Put
is,
something that additional fees for failed inspections would be at the discretion of the zoning enforcement officer. That,
I don't know if you want to leave it that open,
Prescribed.
because people can,
Yeah.
well, you know, argue, why did you charge him, not me, and, you know, I think we'd have to have something more. I'd actually like to refer to him and see what he thinks on that. He's had a lot of experience with this, you know, so I'd like to actually pass the update, we can always add that in.
It's not something that's likely to be an issue near term anyways, so.
Right. No, I mean, I'd like to get these new fees in place, and then, like I said, we'll figure out what he wants to do with that. We can amend it. All right, so I'll ask for motion to pass resolution number 35, amending resolution number 35,
so,
fee schedule.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
we got one that wants to sign, what you say?
Yeah, this is the main one. We also have resolution number 41, 2018. It's a budget transfer. We talked about this last month a little bit, about transferring the funds from, whereas it's necessary for the Clermont Town Board to transfer funds from the highway fund balance into the highway equipment fund in the amount of $30,000. This is the money that we actually had left over last year, went into the fund balance. We didn't make the transfer because we were also waiting for this truck to be sold. Part of that money is actually what's going into his equipment fund, so we're just reimbursing the equipment fund. So, I think a motion to pass that resolution.
So,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, review the highway personnel policy. That is another policy we reviewed when we did all the policies in January. What we came up with
what is
was,
form to sign for the first one?
I think I marked up Mary's. You got the original one? Yeah, I'll send that down.
Somewhere.
So in the highway personnel policy,
Number 41, I'm sorry, you want that one?
nope, the other one, the amending 35.
But I have to make those additional changes.
Oh, you take the paragraph out. Yeah, we'll sign after she.
Next month.
The highway policy was, we discussed, we had a long discussion on what to do about the rising cost of the healthcare. We've had different ideas, and I think we've come up with the fairest solution that we thought of, and run this by the highway superintendent. He also felt that it was fair. Starting immediately, which I have dated January 1st, 2018, because it really doesn't make any difference to any of the employees this year. So retroactive January 1st. What we're doing is we're including hospitalization, which we do now. We pay in full for single plans. We're keeping that we pay the single plan in full, but we're capping it with a maximum amount of $9,000 per coverage plan. Right now, $9,000. Right now, the current plan is costing the town, the taxpayers, $8,400, $8,405, I think. This will give a little bit of room for any small increase for the next probably year or two, and still be under the cap. So we thought that was fair to always know that it's capped. It's, you know, we had a year or two before. If it does go over, anything over the $9,000, they would be subject to pick up themselves. On the family plan, we currently pay 80%, and employees pay 20% of the plans. And right now, it's costing approximately $19,200 per family plan for the town. So what we wanted to do is leave it where we still pay for current employees, we still pay the 80%, they pick up the 20%, but we also put a cap on that for a maximum of $20,000 per plan. So again, this should cover any small increase next year if it goes up. This year is completely covered. But if it goes up over the $20,000, they're responsible for 20% plus what's over the cap. Again, it's the fairest thing we can come up with to try to put a ceiling on these rising costs, which continually every year is just, you know, starting to take a big bite of the budget. So Now, going forward, which we don't have any in place, we don't have any retirements that we know of yet in the near future, but as new hires come in, we still put the same thing for single plans. We're going to cover $9,000, or up to $9,000 as a cap. But on the family plan, we reduced the amount that the town would pay to 70%, which is a small increase of 10%, but certainly still helps save the town a little bit of money. The employee would be responsible for 30%, and then we also reduced the cap from 20,000 to 18,000, which makes sense. It's about 10% less. So it does make a smaller, lower cap, and they pay a little bit more percentage. Again, looking around the towns, compared to several other towns, there are a few towns that still pay 100% of their costs, family and single plan, but there's probably, if not the same, more that pay less than 80%, which we pay. There's some that pay only 50%. So I think this is a very fair compromise. I think we're in the middle or above the middle of the pack, and I think it's acceptable. I hope it's acceptable to everybody, but I think this is the fairest way we can go. So with that being said, I'd like to amend the highway policy. And I don't have the resolution number, the policy number.
Yes,
You have that?
I do, yeah. Well, no, it's actually not in the form of
It's not a resolution, it's
No,
the
it's
policy,
policy.
it's the highway policy. So I'd like a motion to amend the highway policy to accept these new changes.
So moved.
a second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. You can actually have a copy of that. Okay, all right, supervisor report. We have, there's not a ton to talk about. The sales tax is self-explanatory. It's been phenomenal this year. There was just an article in the Register Star by the chairman of the Columbia County Board of Supervisors, I believe, saying that the sales tax ended up around 7.7% above last year, which is phenomenal compared to other counties throughout the state. It's one of the highest, and it's just, you can't say enough about tourism, spending local. I say it all the time. Everybody spends local, saves us money, saves the county money. It all comes back a little bit at a time, but it certainly helps us out and helps the county out. So no real explanation other than tourism. It's got to be tourism that's spiked the spending in Columbia County. So there's been a big push for that, and it's certainly helping out.
Not 67%?
Not 67%. No, you had 67, 6 to 7%.
I had 67 that are sales tax.
I wish. We all wish.
It's 6 to 7.
Yes. Yeah, so we should be receiving our fourth quarter sales tax check probably in the next week or two, which will allow us to finish out the books and see exactly where we ended up last year. But it's certainly above what we budgeted, which is great for revenue. So I'll let everybody know when that comes in. A couple things on the county level. There's been some talk about, I don't know if it's been widely printed in the paper, about the jail. I think I brought it up maybe last month. There's still ongoing studies going to see if it's feasible for the Columbia County to accept all the inmates from Greene County. They want to get out of the jail business. They're under an order to build a new complex or do something else, but they certainly are not willing to spend I think they came up with like some $50 million project they needed to put a new jail in. So what they've done is they solicited Columbia County to take their inmates and pay us a reasonable fee to house their inmates, which may make sense. I don't know yet. I haven't seen all the numbers. I'm being told that it could be lucrative for Columbia County. We will have to put an addition on our jail, upgrade some things. And the number was just thrown out there, about a $10 million project for the county, for us to accept this. But the reimbursement coming from Greene County would well offset that in 3 or 4 years. They're going to be paying us a phenomenal amount of money to do this. And, it certainly could be to our advantage to look into this, and we certainly are. They're running the numbers now. They haven't shared everything yet, they haven't finished it, but I certainly will update everybody unless you read the paper first, that it may make sense for us to be in the business with Greene County. We currently house Greene County inmates now. They pay us, I forget what the number was, $600-some thousand just for some of their inmates they had last year, but they have several more that need to come over here, so it could be quite a bit.
which jail would be expanded? And I know there's to be more jobs for people.
It would be,
Yeah.
yes. It's be the Columbia County Jail.
And where is that? That's in,
That's off the back of, what's the name, the track?
Industrial track.
Industrial track.
Yeah.
oh, that one, yes. We have a lot of correctional facilities up there.
So we're looking into it. I'll let everybody know if the numbers make sense when I updated on it. So moving on, the sewer district has been talked about quite a bit too as well. That project is moving forward. The Commerce Park in Greenport is going to go in, we're still working on finishing the study, but Greenport has acknowledged and signed off and gave the blessing to accept the wastewater from the Commerce Park, which is a large project. Actually, our engineer is doing engineer work on it. It's upwards of $9 million project to run a wastewater line down from the Greenport Commerce Park all the way down to Greenport to their facilities. But it will be, like I said, about a $9 million project to do this. The sewer district actually has to support the cost. So it's not going to cost the county taxpayers anything. We may borrow it for them and then pay it back, but they have to pay it back. So it's not going to be a cost to taxpayers. But it is underway. They're still trying to finish up the study, and it looks like it's going to happen at this point. So I think that's a good thing because we do have a current facility there that handles the wastewater at the Commerce Park that's failing. It's been under court order to remedy, having problems with the levels coming out of it, so it needs to be changed. So this is the solution we're working on. And last thing, big thing up in the county is talks about the Hudson landfill down by the river in Hudson. They proposed study to put a trail project, park, I don't know what you want to call it, park trail system down onto the actual landfill cap that's in Hudson. This is something I've been against from the start. I voted against it when they came up to do the study, but they had grant monies that the county had to actually had to be in charge of. So we had to actually do the study. The city of Hudson couldn't do it because of the way the grant was written. So the county actually took over the study. We did the study on it. I voted against all of it because I just don't think we should be putting a park on top of the landfill because any disturbance to a cap, which the county is forever responsible for, any disturbance to that cap has to be maintained and fixed and taken care of by the county. So you're inviting people down to a landfill to use it as a park or a trail or whatever, right over top of it where you're going to be disturbing it, there could be damage to it. And, environmentally, I don't even know if it's a place you want to invite people and kids to go out and play. So, yeah, I mean, so I voted against it all the way around, and it's still proceeding. I've talked to several of the supervisors that voted for the study, but are not happy about it, and I don't think they're going to be voting for this. Now it's coming to the point where they want the county to put in some money towards this, and I don't think county taxpayer dollars should be going towards a project in Hudson. I'm sorry, it's the city of Hudson. It's down towards down by the river in the city of Hudson.
Yeah.
I forget what street it's on. But
Is it on the river's edge?
It is. It's close to they actually have connecting land that they can trail system up there. I don't know
That
exactly.
be the
what
projects?
It's yes.
Yeah,
It's on the south
down
end.
by the projects, yeah.
Yeah.
North
North
South.
North Bay. North
North
Bay.
Bay,
There
yeah.
you go. So again, I'm going to be against this. I have been against it. And I'm going to continue to be fighting against this. I don't think we should put any county taxpayer dollars towards this personally. I think we offered the city of Hudson to take it over. We said, here, you want it, you can have it, but they won't take responsibility to landfill. So they want to do all this on there, and us still have the responsibility, and I don't like that. So that's just the update where it is. I don't think it's going to happen, but they're still pushing it, they're still moving forward, we're really studying on it. So.
Raymond,
Yeah.
just tell them to go to Kingston, what they did over there to that big thing. They got solar units on it, and you can't walk by there. The smell is so bad, like eggs.
Yep.
We go
Well, that was-
around the other way because it's so bad.
That was an option that we've actually looked
Right,
at, as
an
possibly
option
putting
they
solar
were.
units on it and
Don't
creating
ever write
revenue.
that.
Right. But the city of Hudson is fighting that like crazy because they want to park there, so they
Yeah, I
want somebody to
wouldn't
foot the
do
bill. And it's not going to be us, I hope.
Well,
Only one vote.
but we could have a reciprocal agreement if they help us build our park here.
There you go.
A
Good luck with
million
that.
or two, or 3 or 4,
Good luck with that.
something.
I agree, no.
Okay, one other thing I should have mentioned in the committee reports, we're now getting our oil from Valley Oil, you may have noticed that in the abstract. And some Costco limits run out of oil a couple times. It's happened in a couple other towns also.
I think they've done that with a lot of people. Did the same thing with me at home.
It's been an ongoing issue. I know a couple of towns have already changed. You know, I wasn't gonna go there, but since you brought it up, you know, it's one thing, you know, an error happens, you know, you run out of fuel. It's acceptable. It happened with our other company, what, last year or year before. But when Jimmy calls up and says, listen, the town hall's out of fuel, and they don't come that day, they don't come the next day, 5 days later, they're still not here with fuel, there's a real issue. And I'm sorry, but we had no issues in the past like that, and that's just unacceptable. You know, like in the middle of winter, let somebody go 5 days without fuel. So Jimmy kept it going by putting 5-gallon cans in, so we had heat,
Oh,
to keep the pipes from freezing.
Who's the company?
So, Costco.
I was given an excuse when I ran out at home, and the excuse I was given is the extreme cold weather we had for, I guess there were 2 weeks in December, that what had happened is that they used, so they claim, I don't know if it's true or not, a New York State application that gives estimates of fuel usage. And I don't know if there was an update or a change to this application, but it did not account for a deep drop in temperatures. And therefore, they basically ran out of fuel because their customers were using more than what they estimated the usage would be. And they claim that it was not just their company, it was multiple fuel companies. So I don't really know, you know, if it was.
That's
them.
funny, I haven't heard that one, because I was told they had 7 or 8 people out sick with the flu or something, they couldn't get the drivers out to deliver fuel. That's what I was told.
Well, I was told by a Costco employee.
Okay,
So
that might be more.
That's why I don't know if it's true or not. It may have been. It took a lot of phone calls and a lot of persuasion to get somebody to come out. And when they came out to my house, it was around 8 o'clock at night, which is unusual. But
Did they
it
fill
took a
it all
lot
the
of
way up?
persuasion. What's
Did
that?
they fill it all the way up?
Yes, they did. I also heard other stories where some fuel, I don't know if it was Costco or not, but they were coming out and only delivering 20 gallons. Because they had low supply.
I had long energy come up New Year's Eve, and cap my things off. New Year's Eve now, they came to my house, propane.
Well, needless to
But
say,
I think
we,
propane was another issue because they passed some regulations up in Albany as
Valley
well.
Oil, apparently it's better than good oil, because they took us on and gave us the same price that we were getting from Costco.
yeah, we went back to who was supplying us last year, we've had no problem, and everything's been fine since we switched, so I think at this point, we're gonna stick with our Valley Oil.
Someone also told me that there was a Costco truck at Valley Oil.
I do see, I drive that up and down a lot that way, and I do see other oil companies stopping there.
I have a feeling
There's
that
some kind of collapse.
there was probably a shortage, and some of these smaller companies that only take on the supply that they believe they're gonna use for the winter, they probably had to go to Valley Oil.
I wouldn't have such a problem if it was 5 days. I mean, that's unacceptable.
That's a long
A
time.
couple days at the most. 5 days is unacceptable for any company.
Like I said, it required a lot of persuasion and a lot of phone calls repeatedly before they would come out. And they took 2 days. They took 2 days to come out to talk to me. So,
All right. Last thing but not least, again, it's been said once or twice already, I just want to thank the highway department for their valiant efforts in keeping our roads safe and clean. Hasn't been a real easy winter
And
this
for
year.
watching out for our oil.
And for watching the buildings, because if Jimmy wasn't on top of this, it would have been a couple days before Mary came in and found a nice cold building. So I think he certainly saved their pipes from freezing. So it's very, very appreciative and helpful to have a highway department that looks out and takes care of everything for us, so not just the roads. So again, I want to thank them and the department. So
Well, he's flexible.
he's
No,
flexible.
he is. It makes common sense if you fill it up, you know.
Right.
So give him compliments. By the way, how much do the people who work with him make? I know how much Jimmy makes. How much do the other guys make yearly?
I think the new rate is, I'm going to say 19.50 an hour.
So like yearly, what does it come to?
Yeah, it depends on the overtime, but maybe 36,000, something like that, roughly. Thinking, somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, I think good math, but I know we budget somewhere in the 70s.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. They do good work. You don't mind paying for work.
Okay, other than that, that's about it. Anybody has any other questions about any county issue, please feel free to come see me. I'll certainly do what I can to answer. If I can't get the answer, I'll get back to you with the answer.
I'll say that, but I don't-
Now, entertain a motion to pay abstracts, then we'll do a public comment.
Move to pay the prepaid general and in the amount of $336.59. Vouchers numbers 14, 15, and 16. And it's number 2, abstract number 2.
So moved.
Second?
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Sorry for doing that in the
Move we pay general abstract number 2A, vouchers 17 through 51, in a total of $9,783.31.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
I make a motion to pay trust and agency abstract number 1, claims number 1 and 2 in the amount of $700.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
I move we pay highway abstract number 2, vouchers number 2 through 12, in the amount of $11,306.57.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, that does it for the business. Any, do we have any public comment, public communications?
No?
Anybody, no public comments? We covered them all already?
3 more.
Wow. All right.
I think we commented along the way.
We try to incorporate some of that with some of the stuff we're doing, so yeah. I don't usually like to do that, but when we're talking about specific issues, I do that.
Ray, I just have a nothing about Clermont, but I'm just, the insurance, I know you're trying very, very hard. I mean, is there any discussion at the county level to figure out a more comprehensive insurance for these people?
We do already do it through that.
I know, this is like crazy, and it'll spiral out of control.
Believe it or not, this is actually pretty good, now that they're doing a self-insurance plan through the county, it's better than it could be. And I know the numbers don't show it, but it's just terrible. I mean, it's phenomenal cost on this, and the retirement, add it all up, it's crazy.
I hear from the schools as well, I mean, they're,
Yeah, look at the school unions, teacher unions, it's unbelievable, so.
That's everybody.
I know.
And that's why-
It's horrible. It's horrible.
That's why we're trying to put something, at least cap it, so we can,
Yeah.
put a ceiling on it.
No, I mean, I applaud it, I mean, it's just horrific, I mean, this is not going anywhere. Do you hear anything like broader that besides?
I haven't heard any talks, I'm not actually on the insurance committee, there's actually an insurance committee, but all I've heard is that, this isn't bad compared to what it could be, and, it's not good. Okay, no other comment? There's no other comment, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.